Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. Yeah, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about. And my guest this evening, again, is Dan Meek, friend of mine, attorney and a repeat guest because he's so darn interesting and he's so full of stuff that you viewers are curious about. And tonight we're going to be talking about 2014 ballot measures here in Oregon. How are you feeling, Dan?
Fine.
Really?
Yeah.
You that nervous?
No, you kidding?
He's the only one who can write and look at you in the face.
On this show?
How many times have you been on?
I don't know,
Maybe
7 or 8.
7 or 8 at
Quite a
least.
few.
Yeah. Going to come on some more?
Pardon me?
You're going to come on some more?
We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about ballot measures, but first let's talk a little about who you are. So the viewers who have not seen this show before and haven't seen you before will know who you are so they understand why you have the views that you do on the issues we'll be talking about. You want to guess at what my questions will be and give us an overview from your memory, and then I may ask you some questions after that.
Oh, why don't you go ahead and ask?
Okay. And when and where were you born?
Pocatello, Idaho, a long time ago.
A long time ago.
60 years ago.
60, you're 60 years old?
Yes.
My God, you're well preserved. Or is it pickled? Yeah. Anything significant about your cultural, racial, or national heritage? Are you?
I'm all Welsh.
Oh, Welsh.
All Welsh.
From Idaho.
Yep.
Right. And the religious preference, do you have one of those?
Do not have one. My family, however, is mostly Mormon.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever practice what the Mormon religion required you to do?
I occasionally went to primary with my friends as a child. That's all.
That's enough, huh? But you're not out there educating the world about Mormonism.
No, I managed to avoid that.
Okay. How about your formal education?
I guess I graduated from grade school and high school and college and Stanford Law School.
Mm-hmm. Any other education besides your formal school education?
Just being an attorney in private practice for about 35 years. That's about it.
35 years. Why did you choose an attorney, being an attorney?
I don't know. It's, I guess I'm sort of argumentative, and that's kind of a good thing to do. It also...
You argumentative?
It also is, I don't know, it opens avenues for taking action that otherwise you can't take. I mean, to try to get laws enforced and get laws changed. Probably because Ralph Nader was a lawyer.
Ralph Nader?
Mm-hmm.
Is he significant to you?
Oh yeah, he's what I've tried to emulate, I guess.
Really?
I've been, yeah, all of my clients are public interest clients, and I don't have any for-profit corporate or other business clients at this point, and that's I try to act in the public interest like he does. Why
did you decide to go in that direction instead of some corporate thing in Wall Street and making a lot of money?
I don't know.
How about your parents? Did you get any of that idea from them?
I don't know. My mother was a school teacher, not particularly rebellious. Although when she had just married my father around in her late 20s, strangely enough, she was working as a school teacher, and so over the summer she married my father, and she was immediately fired.
Fired? What
because
for?
Back then school teachers could not be married.
Really?
In Soda Springs, Idaho. That's right.
Idaho is a bit backwards country.
I don't know if it was different in the rest of the country, but married school teachers were banned there.
I'll be darned.
And my father was a train dispatcher on the railroad.
Mm-hmm. Brothers and sisters, do you have any of those?
2 sisters, 2 older sisters, that's all.
What do they think of you?
They love me. I guess.
And with the work you're doing manages to put food on the table? You make enough
Occasionally.
money? Occasionally?
Every 3 or 4 years, I make some money.
It's a long time between when
It
you
is.
get some money.
It is.
Yeah. A partner, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend? Pet?
Linda Williams, partner for the past 30 years or so.
Really? She's put up with you all these years?
Mhm.
Any kids?
She has 2 kids, but not not me. No.
How old are they?
Wow.
Roughly.
35 and 45.
Mm-hmm. Do you see them from time to time?
Mm-hmm.
They like you?
Oh, I suppose. One of them lives in Portland, and one of them has lived in Tokyo for about the last 7 or 8 years.
What's he doing in Tokyo?
Works for a large software company. Does business software programming of some sort.
And your political persuasion?
And of course, when Fukushima melted down, I urged him to bring his family back to America for a while, which he did. He was able to take some vacation time and immediately get out of there. So.
How far away was he from Fukushima?
We live in Tokyo, so it's pretty close.
Yeah.
And it certainly is affected by the fallout from Fukushima.
Many, many years ago, I lived in Yokohama for 27 months. Yeah. And we had lots of earthquakes, but we didn't have Fukushima.
So were you part of the occupying force?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just kidding, but you were.
World War II vet.
All right.
But I went in after they stopped firing guns, but because of the time frame, at a certain time you're still considered a World War II vet with all the benefits.
Oh,
like
yes.
that. Yeah.
Very good.
And so memberships in the political, social, or civic organizations, and don't mention the ACLU.
I won't, because I'm not a member.
We got this ongoing thing, Dan and I. Over the years, occasionally the ACLU will render a decision that some people get very upset with. And I got upset with decisions too, but I didn't abandon the ACLU, because without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be all the way down the tubes, Dan.
Is that so?
Okay, we'll move on.
I will just say ACLU opposes campaign finance reform, opposes limits on political contributions, has attacked the ballot measures that I've written and advocated in Oregon, simply because they limit contributions to political candidates.
And stop slapping your mic.
And I won't slap the mic anymore. World War II. Wow.
Yeah. Born in 1928.
Navy?
Army.
Army.
Medics, yeah.
Wow.
Oh.
I think you should do some shows about that, about your experiences. Someone should ask you these questions.
I've had that happen. There are 3 hours of my personal life on YouTube.
All right, I'll look it up.
1, 2, and 3 segments, and a friend of mine said, why don't we reverse it and let me interview you? And I had a whole collection over the years of photographs from the time I was sitting on my papa's knee. I could hardly hold my back up straight. I was so young. And through the years, we just culled from that whole collection a whole series that pictured stages of my life. And we show in the chronological order, and my interviewer would say, what does that bring to mind for you? And I'd recall memories like that. Of course, he went through, and when it was over, that first interview, he said, we didn't go through all the photographs. You want to do another show? I said, sure. So for 3 months in a row, we did a 1-hour show of my personal life. It's called the video memoir of a New Orleans Creole. Okay. I've had interesting feedback about it. So there's the answer to your question.
All right.
So take a look. A person from the past that you liked or admired besides Ralph Nader?
Oh, maybe...
or alive today, if I may.
He's still alive.
Yes.
George McGovern, I think he's also still alive. And the more I read, the more I like Franklin Roosevelt.
Uh-huh.
And Richard Nixon.
I was waiting for you to
Henry
say
Kissinger.
that. What the hell? You're bad. All right. How do you see the mainstream media nowadays? Is it left, right, or centrist for the most part?
I guess there's a whole a whole different spectrum of being inane. It's ridiculous. And for the most part, and content free.
Would that be left or right or centrist or inane?
Just dumb.
Dumb.
Big waste of time. I guess on the whole, it would be pro-establishment because the media doesn't challenge the establishment.
And is the establishment conservative or liberal or
It's
progressive or what?
very conservative.
You can just
And if all you put on TV, for example, is non-political stuff, I mean, you're supporting the establishment.
Do you do any alternative media, television, radio, internet?
Yeah, I do the Dr. Don show every once in a while, and Populist Dialogues with David Delk.
Yeah, David Delk, great guy. Yeah. What's right with America today as it stands? What's right with our country?
Wow. You need to ask that question in advance for me to think of it.
Yeah. I ask you that now because people don't often think about those things because we look at things that are wrong with America, so to speak, and we don't consider the things that are good about it. Because I'm going to ask you that next, so that we have a sort of a broader conception of what we look at, what we're really about, in our opinion.
Well, I'd say recently, progress has certainly been made in equal rights, like same-sex marriage, for example. That's certainly something that's certainly in the right direction. That was previously not in the right direction. It's kind of hard to think of anything else that is terribly in the right direction. Obviously, the economy has gotten better since the Bush meltdown in 2008. It would be hard to think of a lot of more specific things.
Yeah, right with America nowadays. Now what's wrong with America? We only have about an hour, so keep it short.
The political system is under the thumb of businesses, corporations, and the wealthy, who basically dictate what happens. One very current example of that is a large number of corporations are now buying up small foreign corporations and then undertaking what's called an inversion, where the small foreign corporation technically buys the big U.S. corporation. So the U.S. corporation is suddenly an Irish corporation, or it's suddenly a Maltese corporation, or it's suddenly a Cayman corporation. That's been going on for a long time.
More profit, less taxing, huh?
Yeah, extremely much. Basically eliminates the taxes they pay to the United States.
Oh, you're depressing me.
Yeah.
What else is wrong?
Well, some of these ballot measures that we're going to talk about.
Okay. So shall we take a break and come back and talk about the ballot measures?
All right.
Let's take a break, Mr. E, an early one, because when Dan gets going on ballot measures, who knows where we're going to end up. Okay, we're back. So if you missed the opening of the show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. And the title of today's show is Oregon Ballot Measures, State of Oregon Ballot Measures, that Dan Meek, my guest, repeat guest, is going to talk about, because he's an attorney and he spends practically all of his life pursuing these kinds of things that are of value for the citizenry. And one of his heroes is Ralph Nader, so that should be enough to give you an idea where he's coming from. And beyond that, how I've experienced him in various interviews in the past and in other organizations that we share membership in, what he's about is really caring about human beings, and apparently he walks the talk of loving and being nice and being kind, that sort of a thing. So let's continue on, and let's start talking about, shall we start talking about the ballot measures that you're going to be talking about now?
Right, the ones that will be on Oregon's ballot in November.
Uh-huh.
And you mentioned I was a repeat guest. One feature of these ballot measures is that the most significant ones are repeats. They're repeats from several years ago. Each of them has been on the ballot in a rather similar form within the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So then you'll be bringing us up to speed with what's happening to them now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So first one, Measure 92. It's an initiative. What does that mean? It's an initiative.
Well, an initiative is put on the ballot by voters signing petitions.
Uh-huh.
And, for example, Measure 92, which requires genetically engineered foods to be labeled as genetically engineered, you have to collect about 88,000 valid voter signatures in order to put a statewide statute on the ballot. And that means under the current regime of suppressing the initiative, you have to collect about 140,000 signatures, because the Secretary of State tosses out about 40% of them for a variety of reasons, some invalid.
So if you get to collect the appropriate number of signatures and it passes, and then what happens?
Well, after you collect the signatures and have enough valid signatures, then it goes on the ballot in November, and if a majority of voters vote for it, then it becomes law.
It becomes law. And if it becomes law, what does that mean?
That means it must be obeyed until the legislature changes it.
Uh-huh.
In some states,
You got
like
to label genetically engineered foods. What's wrong with genetically engineered foods? What's wrong with them?
well, scientists don't really know what's wrong or what's right with them. But what the measure means by genetically engineered food is food that is produced by means of plants or animals created by manipulating DNA or genes in the laboratory. And it doesn't mean just like crossbreeding animals to hybridize an animal, like getting crossbreeding to get a better cow or a better pig or something. It means scientifically manipulating the DNA. And typically the DNA is manipulated to make the plant, in the case of plants, most of these are plants,
Yeah.
to make the plant more resistant to insects, or to be resistant to chemicals. For example, a very popular thing to do with these with genetic engineering is to make strains of plants resistant to Roundup, which is a pest. It's a herbicide to kill weeds. And so, if you, for example, make wheat, if you manipulate the genes so that applying Roundup doesn't kill the wheat, then you can apply more Roundup, more of this chemical to kill everything else except the wheat. And so that's one thing they do. The other thing they do is incorporate into the DNA of the plant molecules that will be fatal to insects. Mm-hmm. And if it's fatal to insects, well, what does it do when a human eats it? Nobody really knows.
Boy, we're playing with God or creation.
Well, we're playing with the unknown, and as a result of it being so unknown, 64 other countries already require labeling of genetically engineered food, and that includes Japan and all of Europe. And of course, Japan and all of Europe, they all receive a significant amount of food from the United States. The United States exports, agriculture is one of the United States' biggest exports. And so food producers in the United States already have to label their foods that are genetically engineered so that they can be sold in Japan or Europe. But they don't label them here.
Why is it that those people in Japan and Europe want to know if they're consuming genetically modified food? Why do they?
Well, they want to give people an opportunity to choose to eat it or not.
Uh-huh.
Currently, there's not a lot of evidence about what happens when people eat genetically engineered food over a long period of time. And the idea is people should be allowed a choice to either do that or not. And right now, if you go to the store, you could be buying the vast bulk of your food, having these manipulated DNA inside the food, and you have no way of avoiding it because you don't know, because the food isn't labeled.
And we don't know what effect it's going to have, not just on the people consuming the food, but their offspring,
Right.
and so on down the line.
That's right.
It's just really scary. Why is there a resistance?
I was just reading about some of these things. The Monsanto and the other companies who do this are inserting fish genes into a tomato, or inserting genes from an eel-like fish into salmon, and those are both pending FDA approval.
Is it going to happen?
Probably. The FDA typically approves these things.
So why does Monsanto want to do that?
Well, it makes money, right?
Don't they have enough money?
They will never have enough money.
Mm-hmm. I don't know where to go with that. That's just so awfully scary.
Well, they won't. So
there are certain things. Occasionally, there's something that I thought that crosses my mind that says it's just impossible to consider how human beings can do that kind of crazy, and it is crazy stuff. Yeah.
Well, this measure is somewhat similar to one that Oregon voters turned down about 10 years ago. And back in that election, as I recall, it was just about the most expensive ballot measure election in the history of Oregon at that time. That is, Monsanto and chemical companies, Dow Chemical and others, spent millions of dollars to defeat this. And it went down to an extremely large defeat. It was like 70-30 or worse. And since then, labeling of similar measures to label genetically engineered foods have been proposed in other states, and the chemical industry has spent huge amounts of money to defeat them, and has succeeded, I think, in defeating them every time it's been proposed. So Oregon has an opportunity to be the first to have statewide genetic labeling of genetic engineered foods.
Why is it always defeated?
Because the chemical companies saturate the airwaves with statements about it, that it's stupid, it's unscientific, there's nothing, it has exceptions, so it doesn't cover something as if they want it to cover things that it doesn't cover, and just sowing confusion and negativity about it.
And people are susceptible to being brainwashed or conditioned, propagandized.
Unfortunately, there are. I'm trying to encourage folks on the whole, especially those who don't have time to be politically active or knowledgeable about ballot measures or candidates, to vote against the ads. That is, if you see a whole bunch of ads urging you to do something, to vote one way, just vote the other way. You'll probably be right if you vote the other way. If you see 100 ads on TV saying vote no on Measure 92, vote yes.
How successful do you think your effort will be?
I don't know.
That's a marvelous idea.
It's not. I haven't received a lot of encouragement about it yet, but it would be a way to overcome what is currently the very vast influence of money on politics.
What if only 1% of food contains genetically modified organisms? Only 1% of all the food that we consume or grow. If only a small percentage of them, what does it matter if they're...
Well, I don't think that's true. We don't know what percentage of food that we have contains genetically modified organisms or genetically engineered organisms. This measure, strangely enough, does not cover a packaged food if genetically engineered materials account for 0.9% or less of the packaged food's weight. So even this measure has exceptions.
Yeah.
So it only requires labeling of the food if 1% or more of it by weight consists of genetically engineered materials.
Okay, shall we stop on that one?
Oh, and I would also say the Oregon Progressive Party has endorsed the yes vote on this measure.
It's hard to believe the power of the media and the corporations, considering Japan and all the countries in Europe want to know whether they're consuming GMO foods.
Right.
And people in America are so conditioned or brainwashed until it doesn't matter to them.
Well, and you may remember that last year, when Japan had halted the import of wheat from Oregon.
Yeah.
When a farmer's field was suddenly found some genetically modified wheat growing in his field that he didn't plant. It's because the seed blew in from somewhere else where the companies had planted I think a test bed of genetically modified wheat. So this measure doesn't ban the growing of genetically modified organisms in Oregon. It just requires labeling. Jackson County, Oregon, recently did ban, by initiative, back last November, in May, did ban the growing of genetically modified plants.
Is that going to spread?
No, because the Oregon legislature immediately said no county, no local government can do this anymore. So when the chemical companies lose on the local level, they go to the state level and get the state level to ban the local level from controlling it.
Is capitalism successful in Oregon?
Oh, are you kidding? Extremely successful.
Mm-hmm. So let's leave this one. You got something more to say about Measure 92?
That's about it.
Measure 91, another initiative, allows possession, manufacture, sale of marijuana by or to adults, subject to statute, licensing, regulation, taxation. This is going on around the country and been successful in Colorado and Washington State, and
correct.
It's going in that direction. Do you think it's going to go further? And
well, it's kind of up in the air. In Oregon had a marijuana legalization measure on the ballot 2 years ago, and the folks who were campaigning for it basically had no money and were not doing anything in the media about it, and it was thought to have no chance at all of passing, but it only lost by, as I recall, 53 to 47%.
That's close.
And this year it is a somewhat different measure, which I can describe in a little bit more detail. And this year, it has a considerable amount of financial support, and I'm told that the Yes campaign recently made a $2.3 million media buy, which is kind of unheard of for a measure like this.
Sure.
But the polls so far have only shown support in the range of 50% in favor, 42% against. And when it comes to ballot measures, that's not a good result, because at the last minute, most people who are not particularly interested in politics but nevertheless vote, most folks at the last minute go to the no side.
Yeah.
So having a poll that shows only 50% supporting it now is not good. But then again, they will have a media campaign going on in September and October to publicize it.
Why won't it pass? Why won't people endorse it?
Well, generally, I think conservatives would be against legalizing a dangerous gateway drug. It obviously leads to heroin and other things. It's in the same on the federal level. It's in the same category as heroin, as a controlled substance.
Interesting. A dangerous gateway drug. Is this what people believe?
Some people believe this, yes.
Why is that?
Because they are told that.
Who tells them that?
The federal government tells them that, and conservative organizations tell them that.
Why?
Why do they do that?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't. Because they don't want marijuana to be legal, so everyone will have to drink alcohol? I don't know.
You just said it.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because under this measure, what this measure would do, it would legalize any adult person 21 or older to possess 1 ounce of marijuana away from home, as long as it is out of public view, or to have 8 ounces of marijuana at home, and 16 ounces of marijuana products 72 ounces of marijuana in liquid form and 1 ounce of marijuana extracts, whatever that is. I don't even know what that is.
It's a lot of dope.
And the measure allows a household to have up to 4 marijuana plants, which cannot be grown in public view. So I guess the alcohol companies, the liquor companies might oppose it. It is an alternative, I guess, to that. And it's an alternative that is rather easily grown at home.
Yeah.
So,
And if people are using marijuana, then they won't use as much alcohol, and the alcohol industry will not make as much money as they're making right now.
then again, the alcohol industry could get into growing marijuana.
How long do you think it'll take for it to happen? I think it will happen.
I don't know.
I think the measure
I think
will
it will
pass,
happen.
and pretty soon the alcohol businesses or industry will get in on the act and put the small entrepreneurs out of business in the marijuana business.
Well, under this measure, the control of the business of marijuana production and selling is left up to the Oregon Liquor Control Commission.
Oh, okay.
So they have to, in order to grow it or sell it or process it, you have to have a license from the Liquor Control Commission.
Why do we have it under the Liquor Control Commission? Why can't it be under its own commission, marijuana?
Well, I guess in order to avoid wasteful duplication, it's, we already have a commission that kind of oversees the selling of an addictive, intoxicating product. Why not put the other intoxicating product in there as well?
So marijuana is addictive?
I said intoxicating. I don't know if it's addictive. I don't know.
I'm poking fun at you because the arguments you're making that the other side makes are so ridiculous, but we got to pursue them.
Mm-hmm.
I tried marijuana a couple of times, many, many years ago. It makes me nuts. And from what I understand, it affects people differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried it a few times about 30 years ago, somewhat more than 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was fun, but no big.
I think it's a good idea.
I didn't inhale, of course.
You're like a friend of yours, huh? Yeah, so if that passes, I think it'll be good for the society, good for culture, and good across the board.
Well, one other feature of it to keep in mind is that it taxes marijuana rather heavily at various levels of its sale, and the fiscal impact statement that came out a few days ago said that the state would expect to get from $17 to $40 million in tax revenue from it every year. So that's something. It's not all that much compared to the state budget, which is about $25 billion a year. But at least the taxation would pay for all of the regulation and leave money left over. And the measure directs the leftover money to 40% to schools, 25% for substance abuse, 15% to the state police, I guess.
Would, if this passes and marijuana becomes legal, would we have less alcohol-related tragedies and difficulties in the population?
I have no idea. Mm-hmm. Or would we have more marijuana-related tragedies in the population? This measure obviously doesn't make it legal to operate a car or machinery or anything else while you're imbibing of marijuana, because you can still be arrested for driving while intoxicated, whether you're intoxicated by alcohol or marijuana or some other substance.
Do you think they're comparable? That the effects of intoxication by marijuana has the same effect of being intoxicated by alcohol?
No, I don't think it's the same. I think alcohol...
A degree of impairment.
Well, I think the degree of impairment depends on the degree of consumption in both cases.
Oh, yes, yes.
You can be slightly impaired or greatly impaired using either one. I think the nature of impairment is different. But I don't know which one is more or less dangerous when it comes to driving a car, for example. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so shall we move on?
The Oregon Progressive Party recommended a yes vote on this.
All right.
All right.
Now, what do we have next? We have 22 minutes for
Measure 90, and I consider this to be the most important measure on the ballot.
changes general election nomination processes. Provides for single primary ballot listing candidates, top two advance. What does that mean?
Well, what this does, the other measures that we've talked about, and we'll talk about, address a certain issue or certain policy. This measure, on the other hand, addresses how candidates are elected to office, so it affects all policies and all issues. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember who it was, maybe Everett Dirksen, who said, if you let me write the rules, then I'll determine the outcome. And that's what this does. It rewrites the rules for how candidates are elected in Oregon. What it does is it takes all of the elections which are now run on a partisan basis. That means candidates are identified on the ballot by party, Republican, Democratic, Progressive, Working Families, Libertarian, etc. It changes the way those elections work. Right now, for example, on the general election ballot in November, for these offices like Governor, Secretary of State, U.S. Senator, U.S. Representative, the state legislature, Senate and House, you will see a variety of candidates, and each will be identified by the party or parties that have nominated that person. Democratic Party, Independent Party, Constitution Party, etc. And for example, statewide offices, you'll typically have 4 or 5 different candidates to choose from. For nearly every legislative office, you only have 2 candidates to choose from because the minor parties don't get terribly involved in the legislative offices.
Yes.
What this does is it says on the general election ballot you only have 2 candidates, period. And the way those candidates get their way onto the general election ballot is in the primary election. Every candidate runs together in one primary election, and all registered voters get to vote on them. And the top 2 advance to the general election.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if the top 2 are 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans or 2 nothings. They go to the general election. This measure, a very similar version of this measure, has been in effect in California for the last 2 election cycles, and in Washington for about the last 3 or 4 election cycles.
What's been the result?
Well, in California, for example, they have about 120 partisan elections because it's the statewide races plus the California legislature, the Assembly and the Senate. And of those 120 contests this year, there will be 28 where the general election ballot consists of 2 candidates who are identified with the same party.
So the other party doesn't stand a chance then.
That's true. And of those instances, about 3/4 of them are Democrat versus Democrat. And that is fully to be expected, and that will happen in Oregon as well, that you will have many races in the general election that are 2 Democrats. And the reason for that is just demography and geography. That is, in Oregon, districts, the districting system produces districts that are geographically compact. But it just turns out the Democrats tend to live together.
Yeah.
They live together in Portland and Eugene. So there are many legislative districts in Portland and Eugene that are 80% or more Democratic registration. In those districts, virtually for every election of folks to the legislature, to the House of Representatives or Senate, you're going to have 2 Democrats on the general election ballot, which means the Democrats get to spend a lot of time and energy fighting each other. Republicans, on the other hand, are more spread out. The districts where they have a majority of the registration or a plurality of the registration, like some suburban areas and basically all rural areas, they rarely have more than 65% of the registration. So they will, in a top 2 situation, you will rarely see on their ballots 2 Republicans. So this is actually is quite a clever measure for the Republican Party, because it is a way to get Democrats to spend a lot of time and effort fighting each other, and that will leave them less time and effort to fight their opponents in the Republican Party. The other thing that it does that benefits the Republican Party is that it moves the important election from November to May. Because as we just indicated, May determines which 2 candidates are on the general election ballot. It becomes a much more important election. It turns out that turnout in the primary election is much more heavily Republican than it is in the general election.
Why is that?
Because Republicans in general are more educated than Democrats on the whole. They are more interested in government and politics than the Democrats. They have more time to think about it. You know, the Democrats are out there with 2 jobs and trying to raise a family. You basically have time to do your job, go home, you know, drink a beer and go to bed, and take care of your family. So Republican turnout in primary elections is much, much higher than Democrats. And so if you move the important election into the primary, into May, when a lot of Democrats aren't paying any attention, then the Republicans will have much more influence. In fact, the other advantages, strangely enough, are elderly voters, who also tend to be more Republican. That's because you and I turn out in the May election. However, voters under the age of 40 basically don't turn out in primary elections. Extremely low turnout in Oregon. In fact, in the past election, the number of voters under the age of 40 and who voted in the primary was only about 100,000. The number of them who voted in the general election was 500,000.
Oh, that's a big difference.
80% of the younger voters who vote in the general election don't vote in the primary. So they basically, under this measure, become, you know, they would have to suddenly develop an interest in the primary election, or their votes, you know, aren't going to count nearly as much. The other thing about this measure is that it also destroys the legal basis for minor parties to exist. The minor parties in Oregon...
That's a powerful statement. Destroys the legal basis for the other parties to exist.
Well, in Oregon, 4 of the minor parties, the Working Families Party, Pacific Green Party, the Constitution Party, and the Progressive Party, they maintain their status, their legal status as parties, because every 2 to 4 years they have to run a candidate in a statewide election and earn 1% of the vote.
1%.
Well, what this measure does is it basically removes all of those folks from the general election. The experience in California and Washington has been that, and I can't say this with 100% certainty for Washington, I can say it with 100% certainty for California, is that in every single race for statewide office, the legislature, or any other partisan race in California, where there's at least 2 persons on the primary ballot who have next to their names their identification with the major parties, like Democrat or Republican, there's at least 2 of them, then no minor party or unaffiliated candidate has made the general election ballot. 0.
And as time goes by, eventually that minor party disappears.
It disappears because if you can't earn votes in the general election, you don't get to be a minor party. And this measure is very poorly drafted on this subject, and I think puts all of those the existence of all of those minor parties in jeopardy. The other thing it does is that it really degrades the value or the information that's conveyed by the name of a party on the ballot. You know, the name of the party, the name of the candidate's party, is by far the most important piece of information to most voters. That is, just think of it yourself. You're probably in the top 1/10 of 1% of politically active folks. But when you look at your ballot, do you, especially, you know, the folks who are beneath the statewide races, do you really know who they are? Or do you look and see, is this the Democrat, the Republican, the Progressive, the Libertarian? What, you know, I'm probably one of the most knowledgeable folks. I look at party labels because that's what tells me what they believe in, to tell you the truth. What the top 2 measure does is that it makes those party labels almost meaningless, because it allows anyone 70 days before the primary election, up to 70 days before the primary, to change their voter registration to any party they want, and then file for office, and then be identified on the primary election ballot as, you know, Joe Blow, comma, Democratic, or Joe Blow, comma, progressive. The guy could be a Nazi, a child molester, whatever. And they had a person totally unknown to that party. But nevertheless, there they are on the ballot. Joe Blow, Democrat. So that tends to degrade the value of the party label, because the party label gets attached on the ballot to persons who have nothing to do with the party and whatsoever. The other thing is that it makes the ability of anyone to advance to the general election dependent upon the number of other persons identified with that party who are on the primary election ballot. Now, when you think about it now, let's say it's an overwhelmingly Democratic registration district like most of the inner Portland district. You could have 10, 15, 20 Democrats running in the primary election, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't affect the ability of a Democrat to win in the general election, does it? They're still going to be able to win in the general election, whichever Democrat wins in the primary. And you can have a vigorous contest among 100 Democrats in the primary. It doesn't, and see who wins. That person will then go to the general election and face off against the Republican, and in Portland probably win. In this measure, if there are, let's say, and let me give you an example of how this really worked in California, in Congressional District 31 in California. It was a district with a majority Democratic registration. It was created about 50 years ago as California's population increased and got more members in Congress. It has always elected a Democrat to Congress, overwhelmingly in every case. In 2012, in the first year of California using the top two system, 4 Democrats ran in the primary and 2 Republicans ran in the primary. Guess what happened? The Democrats split the Democratic vote 4 ways. The 2 Republicans split the Republican vote, but only 2 ways. Both Republicans went to the general election, and for the first time in history, that district elected a Republican to Congress.
Wow.
Now, that same scenario in that same district came within 0.4% of the vote of happening again this year, just last June. Within 1% of the vote, a statewide vote, California, just this past June, almost nominated 2 Republicans to the statewide office of comptroller, even though California is a very heavily Democratic state. So this top 2 measure introduces a very irrational element into the election of candidates. The irrational element is if you have many people who identify with one party running in the primary, they can eliminate each other. And that raises the other problem with it, and that is this can be done on purpose. That is, let's say I'm a Republican strategist. Maybe this will be my new career.
Karl Rove.
My new career, yes, that's right. I debated Karl Rove in high school.
Did you really?
I did.
Oh, that's what happened to you.
Beat him too. He went to like Highland High School or Skyline High School in Salt Lake City. So that was one of the folks we debated a lot. Anyway, okay, I'm a Republican strategist, and I see that I want to advance Republican candidates to the general election. Well, one thing I can do that would be very effective is just get a whole bunch of people to sign up as Democrats to run in that primary. Split the Democratic vote. Especially get people with common names. Joe Smith, John Williams. Oh, I know that. I know John Williams. But if you just put enough names in there, I call them ringers, you put enough ringers in there on one side, split up the vote of the adherents of that party, then the members of the other party advance. And the other thing, because of that irrational element, what has happened in Washington is that the various county Democratic Party chairs have testified that they've had to go out to people who wanted to run for the Democratic nomination for a seat in the Washington legislature. They've had to go to those folks and say, no, don't run in the primary, because if you run in the primary, that can knock all of us out of the general election. So folks who are interested in becoming involved in politics as candidates, and that's a rare thing, that's really, a very admirable thing to do, they are now being discouraged because simply by entering the primary, they can destroy the prospects for their own party to advance to the general election.
So the system is no good now.
That's the system that's being, in Washington, that's right. The system is no good now. Another thing that you can look at to give you sort of an idea of who's behind this is that the funding has come, nearly all of the funding has come from corporations for this measure. It's about $1 million now. Corporations, corporate executives, etc. In particular, ADEC. It's a corporation in Oregon that always supports very conservative candidates. The Pape Group, Roseburg Forest Products, Tim Boyle at Columbia Sportswear, a bunch of insurance companies, a bunch of private equity investors, etc. Pacific Power and Light, Portland General Electric, grain company, grain companies. I mean, it's basically a corporate-funded and corporate executive-funded measure, parading as if it's a populist measure.
So the top two advance is not a good idea.
No, it's not a good idea.
Where's the Oregon Progressive Party?
The
stand on
Oregon
that?
Progressive Party has recommended a no vote on this.
Okay.
All right.
Where do we go next?
Well, we're going in reverse order. Measure 89.
We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left.
That's okay. We've done. Measure 89 is a measure which amends the Oregon Constitution to prohibit state and local subdivisions from denying or abridging equality of rights on account of sex. This is basically the Equal Rights Amendment for women. Oregon has a provision in its Constitution that already says that laws may not treat people differently based on their sex unless justified by specific biological differences between men and women. So the ACLU, for example, recommends a no vote on this measure because they think it sets up some sort of a negative implication that if somehow if it forbids discrimination on the basis of sex, that means the Oregon Constitution allows discrimination on other bases. I don't really accept that, and I support this measure. Curiously, it was put on the ballot purely by the expenditure of about $400,000 by a corporate attorney, John DiLorenzo, who is Oregon's leading opponent of campaign finance reform. What?
Association is enough.
So he's doing something. He's doing something productive here. Okay. So
thank goodness for guys like you digging deep enough to figure out what's really going on behind the scenes.
I think the Progressive Party took no position on 89. But measure 88. This is another big one, but it's not an initiative. It's a referendum. Which means that this is a law that the Oregon legislature passed. But when the Oregon legislature passes a law and doesn't attach an emergency clause to it, which it can easily do, then Oregon voters can go out and collect a number of signatures equal to 4% of basically the registered voters, although that's not quite that calculation. You can collect about 70,000 signatures. That by itself nullifies the law and places it on the ballot as a measure. And then if voters vote yes, then what the legislature did is resurrected. If voters vote no, then what the legislature did never takes effect. So in this case, the Oregon legislature last year adopted a law that says that folks who are not who do not have proof of legal presence in the United States can nevertheless obtain driver cards, which entitle them to the privilege in Oregon of driving and would enable them to get automobile insurance, for example.
We got about 2 minutes left, Dan.
Okay. So the conservatives went out and got the signatures to nullify that and put this on the ballot. The Oregon Progressive Party recommends a yes vote. Yes, folks who are here without documentation of their legal presence, that is, who aren't citizens or resident aliens or etc., should nevertheless be able to get a driver's card and get automobile insurance.
And the Oregon Progressive Party?
Yes on measure 88.
And I'm a member of the Oregon Progressive Party too.
Yes. Measure 87 is kind of a very, I think, minor thing. It amends the Constitution to allow state court judges to be employed for the purpose of teaching at public universities and to receive compensation for performing military service in the Oregon National Guard. Fine if they want to do that. Good.
86?
86. It
amends the Constitution?
It amends the Constitution to allow Oregon, the state of Oregon, to sell up to $4.3 billion, 1% of the real market value of the state, $4.3 billion, in new general obligation bonds. And with the earnings from those bonds to be used to assist students pursuing post-secondary education in Oregon. Let's say for these were 20-year bonds, that would cost Oregon about $450 million a year for debt service. Sort of the idea is you issue the bonds and then you invest the money in a way that makes a profit. You use the profits to provide scholarships for college students.
And what does the Oregon Progressive Party say about that?
No position.
No position. Okay, we better stop now before the director yells at us. Okay, Mr. E, public service announcements. You're going to put one or two of those up there now, since we have a few minutes left. Yay! The Populist Dialogues, David Doak's show. Click on AFD videos. Go to www.afd-pdx.org. And the next one we're going to tell you about is, I got to tell you about Kentucky Fried Chicken. No, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too, and you too, Dan. And you too. Thanks again for watching.